Let's go! So, this is going to be an emotionally charged video today because I know a lot of you are furious about Brian Kelly letting Corey Raymond go to Florida. Or is that what actually happened here? We're learning a lot about this LSU team, and we're going to do a little film study as well. So I know this is from 2020, but this is all going to tie in together because, as you see here, this is a wide open touchdown pass, something that we saw far too often from LSU. So we're going to get back to the film study and LSU's horrid pass defense over the past couple of seasons, but let's talk about why this is such a huge loss for LSU and why this could also be a good thing, okay? It's a little bit of both because obviously the first big loss involving Corey Raymond is his recruiting prowess. I mean, this guy came in 2012. Kevin Tolliver and a lot of these prospects that Corey Raymond got to LSU, as you guys are looking at now, are from the state of Texas and Florida. And there's no debating that Corey Raymond went into both of those states and consistently plucked 3, 4, and 5-star talent, whether that be Rashard Robinson or Jamal Adams or Jalen Mills, who was only a 3-star. These guys not only came in, John Battle, these guys not only came in, they also went to the next level under Corey Raymond's leadership. So there was no debating that this guy was big time, and who can forget the great Grant Delpit, who was pretty emotional. A few more quick bonuses here. The first is that Corey Raymond, let's be honest, this guy is world class, right? When it comes to getting NFL draft picks, his resume is pretty impeccable. And then on top of that, Corey's just a good guy to be around. By all accounts, everyone loved Corey Raymond, which is why so many people are emotional and trying to figure out what happened, which we're going to get to in just a second. However, there are some major counters to Corey Raymond's resume. The first is his recruiting, right? While it has been really good and he took it to the next level with Texas and Florida, I always say this about ace recruiters, that there's often more factors that goes into a recruit's decision than just their position coach or primary recruiter, such as potential compensation, whether that be legal or illegal, playing time, where you might be located in the country, and obviously the biggest factor when it comes to Louisiana prospects is getting to play for the home state school with the biggest defensive back brand in the country. And while the Texas and Florida players are nice, most of LSU's defensive backs that have been successful at LSU are still from the state of Louisiana, and they likely go to LSU regardless of who the defensive back coach is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is LSU recruits itself because of two people that preceded Corey Raymond, Tyrann Mathieu and our guy Patrick Peterson, okay? And what's funny is even before them, there were iconic defensive backs such as Corey Webster, Jack Hunt, Chevis Jackson, Jonathan Zenon, the list goes on there. But really, the DBU swagger era really started with Patrick Peterson and Tyrann Mathieu. They were brands, both Heisman campaigns. Tyrann Mathieu ended up being a Heisman finalist in New York, along with Morris Claiborne. LSU had won back-to-back Thorpes. Tyrann Mathieu won the Bednarik. It was just ridiculous what those LSU secondaries did. Ron Cooper's resume, who was the actual leader of these Patrick Peterson and Tyrann Mathieu secondaries. And as you see, Ron Cooper had quite the resume before he ever even got to LSU, with stops at Wisconsin and multiple roles with the South Carolina Gamecocks. His resume was far more experienced than Corey Raymond's resume before he took over at LSU. And remember this, while the LSU secondary was really good when Ron Cooper took over, it wasn't as good as what Corey Raymond took over. Corey Raymond took over, once again, the greatest secondary back-to-back years you will ever see in 2010 and 2011. So think of the way that Ohio State was handed to Ryan Day. It's kind of the same thing here with Corey Raymond. And why that's similar is that, yes, Ryan Day still has to sustain the level of success. Corey Raymond still had to sustain the level of success, but they still were given the absolute best jobs and opportunities you could possibly ask for. And that's the thing. They always tell you, players more important than coaches, okay? So we go back to this play, all right? And I want to bring it back up because, well, we have to bring in the biggest question mark surrounding Corey Raymond, which is his actual defensive back coaching. LSU kept getting picked on with this exact concept, okay? It's pretty simple. Seth Williams picks off right here Cordell Flott and Elias Ricks. They don't pass it off here. And there's a couple of ways you can do to combat this. This is kind of like a screen and roll in basketball. And this is Corey Raymond's position group, right? These are just the corners. Now, we'll get into playing man coverage every snap, which is what LSU did in this game and all of last year. But we simply can't give up free touchdowns such as this one. Now, this happened in the Auburn game, and you would think LSU and Corey Raymond would fix this pick and roll, rub route type of situations. But that's the thing. They never fixed it. Against Arkansas, first drive of the game, this turned out to be the biggest EPA per play touchdown of the game. Treylon Burks was able to get a wide open touchdown. Yes, one of the best receivers in college football was left untouched, essentially, for a deep touchdown to start that game, basically on the same thing you just saw, okay? So it happened again. No big deal. It's not going to happen a third time, right? Well, it did happen again against Alabama, where Devonta Smith, once again, one of the best receivers in college football, was able to do essentially the same concept, and we never fixed it. And that's the thing. It would be one thing if you didn't fix it with average athletes, but these are some of the best defensive backs in America. So that's the thing. You guys are reading some slides here. There's all these coverage questions, but this is the biggest, okay? We had that horrible 2020, and we had all offseason to figure out that we can't play man coverage on every snap. And if I were Corey Raymond, or I think if any defensive back coach were Corey Raymond, and they went to you and say, look, Corey, what do you think we need to do as far as our coverage is concerned? The first thing I would say is not play man coverage on every snap. But what did we do versus UCLA? What did we do versus Ole Miss? What did we do versus Kentucky? We did that exact thing, and it ended up being doom and gloom, giving us little to no shot to win those games because quarterbacks were picking us apart because we were running the most static defenses and coverages known to mankind. If I were Corey Raymond in that spot, I would have slammed my fist into the table and said, look, guys, we have got to stop this because you are giving us no shot to win and you are running my defensive backs ragged. Here's why I'll defend Corey Raymond, because he very well could have done that. I mean, he could have kept going to Bo Pelini, Ed Orgeron, and Durante Jones and saying, look, guys, you are setting us up for failure. We've got to make some adjustments. I do think, though, if he did do that, they would have listened to him because he's Corey freaking Raymond. I know Kerry Cooks doesn't light the world on fire, especially following a legend like Corey Raymond. And look, I'm going to touch on this tonight in the live stream regarding Cooks's recruiting history and NFL draft history, but I do want to bring up one interesting fact. Cooks's and our guy Ron Cooper's resume was actually better than Corey's when he took over, because as you've been seeing, Corey Raymond's passing yard defense numbers at Utah State and Nebraska weren't all that fantastic. Now, yes, Utah State outside of the top 100 in passing yards for both those years, but you notice 18th at Nebraska. But when you look at the yard per attempt numbers, it wasn't really that good because Nebraska played at a slower pace that year. They just didn't play as many pass attempts. Their yard per attempt numbers at 6.9 still weren't that great. So Corey Raymond had 3 years, only 3 years, of defensive back coach experience before he took over at LSU. So it begs the question, does the defensive back coach make LSU special, or does the LSU secondary and its players make the defensive back coach special? I think it's pretty clear based on just what we've seen from Ron Cooper since he left LSU. He hasn't really been all that elite a defensive back coach. He's been okay. And based on what we've seen from Corey Raymond, those stats and Nebraska were fine. Utah State, not so much. And just with 3 years experience, he became one of the best defensive back coaches of all time. I think it has more to do with LSU than the coach. And that very well could be the case with Kerry. This is going to be the most talented set of members or secondary players that Kerry Crooks has ever worked with in his career. But that's the most interesting thing, okay? Ron Cooper left the LSU secondary with Corey Raymond pretty pristine. Now, going into this next year, would you honestly say that Corey Raymond has left this secondary in a better spot than what it was 2 years ago? The answer to that is probably not. Now, a lot of that has to do with Eli Ricks, of course, going in the transfer portal, but I have no idea how the secondary is going to line up next year outside of Dwight McGlothern and hopefully a healthy Sage Ryan. So it is without a doubt that the secondary right now is a little bit of a mess. And I think if you're Brian Kelly looking at the coverage mistakes that LSU has made these last couple of seasons, the lack of adjustments, some of the recruiting misses and lack of development in recent years hasn't been as sharp as it was earlier in Raymond's tenure, I can definitely see why he wanted to go in a different direction. Now, that is not me saying that I agree with Brian Kelly's move. I actually don't. I would have retained Corey Raymond because his resume is pretty daggum special and he still is recruiting at a high level, and I still think with the players that Raymond was bringing in consistently, eventually we would be able to smooth it out. But you know, I can see it. It's justified. It really is more justified. And I understand that a lot of you, and I've been showing some of the tweets, a lot of you don't feel like this situation was handled the best. Now, that's the thing. There's a lot of hearts being broken because obviously Kev FAULK was also fired today. And that sucks. He wasn't fired necessarily. He might be demoted to an off-field role, which really does suck because Kev FAULK has only had 2 years to be the LSU running back coach. The first year was a pandemic year, his first ever year being a running back coach. The rotation was a little strange, but still, he was still getting his bearings. And he also brought in Armani Goodwin and Corey Kiner, which is pretty daggum good. And then this last year, obviously, he had the tragedy of losing his daughter, and now he, lost his job. Now, look, coaching is unfair, and let's be honest, more than likely, Frank Wilson is going to be the running back coach along with his title as the associate head coach, and Frank Wilson is the best running back coach ever at LSU. So, yeah, I can understand that, but man, I just feel bad for Kev FAULK because, as many of you know, I'm a big Kev fan, and I do wish him the best. And I do wish Corey Raymond, even though he's going to Florida, I do like Corey enough to wish him. Actually, I can't do that. I can't wish anyone that goes to Florida the best. But still, we can acknowledge that Corey Raymond did a lot more positives for LSU, 10 times more positives than he ever did negative at LSU. Now, a lot of you are trying to figure out what exactly happened with Corey Raymond. Why wasn't he retained by Brian Kelly? What the heck happened with Mickey Joseph? Well, I have been able to gather more information as to what potentially happened, and we're about to start a live stream. And if you're watching this on a recorded version, the live stream will be linked down below. We'll talk about that during the live stream with how Brian Kelly has handled all of this, because it is rubbing some of y'all the wrong way. So we'll get into that tonight. Let's go. Live streams. Let's do it. Let's go. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom. Oh, we're doing pizza tonight. Let's go.